What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today we're going to be talking about the current Mystic Banner hero, Closer Charles, and whether or not you should pull for him. So if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. So as always, I like to start the video with a summary of both what's coming next, as well as what the actual character does, right? So you get a better idea when we actually go deeper into the kit. You understand what I'm coming from, and you can get a better idea. So first, what's coming next, right? So we got confirmation that the next banner rotation is going to be Specimen Says along with Angel of Light Angelica. And Angel of Light Angelica is going to be a 4-star, so you can't pity her, but she looks extremely powerful. Most people, most high-end players, legend level players, have said that she looks insanely powerful and is going to be a unit you are going to want to pick up. If you can go ahead and read her kit, it is on their Epic 7 YouTube channel, and the kit looks ridiculously powerful. You're going to want to pick up that unit, and she does counter cleave, so that's something to think about too, because Charles is going to be a primary cleave unit. And that kind of transitions us to the actual summary on Charles. Charles is primarily going to be a cleave / aggro unit. Now, there are people that are going to try to make him a bruiser just because he has evasion, although it's not going to work as good as someone like Violet. So it honestly, yes, you can potentially use him as that because he does have attack buff in last 3 and he does have some form of survivability, but it's not most likely recommended. If you're pulling for him, it is going to be for his potential as a cleaver and as an aggro unit. So as far as that, what does he do? He opens up a very unique thing that I think is really cool for cleavers, right? And I'm not a cleaver, so I can't say how impactful this will be, but it kind of works as a challenger domino in the way that this skill, whenever an enemy drops below 30% health or dies, right, it does trigger on death. You get a CR push, essentially allowing you to go in and CR push your team up. Very similar to a CDOM where you have a unit set up into you and then you set up for the rest of your team, right? So he does open up some very unique opportunities with cleaving, with potentially opening with Assassin Sid, and with someone like a Kali, or he himself can open with S3, push your team up, kind of like an Operator Sigurd, where the Operator Sigurd will open, set up the team, and then use the CR push to finish off the job later on. Before a unit dies, he can come in and execute a target, right? So he does have those two variabilities. As far as to whether or not you should pity for him, if you're not a cleaver or a aggro player, you should not be pitting for him at all, because most likely you are not going to be using him, right? He is a cleave / aggro style unit. If you're not cleaving or playing aggro, you are not going to be using him almost at all. If you're a cleaver / aggro though, should you use pity on him? That one is a little bit more up to you because the playstyle is pretty unique and cleave itself has a lot of tools already. So if you want to be able to open up your drafts a little bit more, if you think that units in the future will benefit Charles a lot more, then I would consider pulling for him. But all in all, he's gonna be a lot like Operator Sigurd, where Operator Sigurd didn't do a lot on release, but over time, people started realizing how they worked. People saw the synergies. More units got released that synergized better with Operator Sigurd, and Operator Sigurd ended up being a good unit, right? So very similar situation to Operator Sigurd, where they are very attached to their playstyle. Operator Sigurd doesn't really see play outside of aggro or cleave. Same thing with Closer Charles, most likely. And they could potentially get better over time. Me personally, I wouldn't pull for him just because I don't like the playstyle too much. But again, it's something that you as a cleaver have to decide. Does it open up your draft enough? Do you think it does that for you? But with that, let's actually take a deep dive at the kit to potentially give you some ideas on how the kit works, as well as to what the unit can potentially do, and the stat line, of course. So first, the stat line, right? He has the exact same stat lines as Violet, which is why at first people thought he could be a booster style unit, right? Because very similar to Violet, and his S3 does give him evasion. However, though, he doesn't start with evasion, and if you remember old Violet didn't start with evasion either, and he wasn't doing so hot. So keep that in mind. Kind of a weird stat line, right? Very can take a couple of hits, but not enough to just like tank out an opponent, right? Unless you dedicate him with that build. As far as the awakening, it is crit rate, and as you guys know, the crit rate awakening is going to be the best awakening they can have because it's the most stats for an imprint. So if you have this, you can definitely do more damage with them, right? It's kind of how it rolls. So now as far as the skills and what they do. So first, the S1 is pretty basic. right? So it just mainly does damage unless the enemy is below the 30% damage threshold. Perception uses demolition perception. So perception is what you get when the enemy drops below 30%. So if you get perception, your S1 becomes empowered, right? And that empowered becomes demolition, which essentially does increased damage proportional to the target's lost health. And when you kill, your S3 reduces by cooldown by 1. So it is an execute ability essentially. This is most likely going to kill a low health target, right? As long as you have the buff, which if you're using Charles the way he's supposed to be played, you're gonna have this buff when you're doing your S1, right? Because you have attack buff, your whole team will have gone, you will do some damage. You most likely are gonna be using this to execute a target with demolition. Sadly I can't show that, but it's just like that Charles S2, right? That's how it looks like. By the way, as far as the design, it just looks like a skin. The animations aren't like the greatest, but not every character can have insane animations. But that aside, let's keep going with the kit. So this S1, again, think of it like an execute, right? It's pretty good. It executes a target because it does damage based on their missing health, as well as doing more damage than a regular S1. It does pretty good S1 damage, right? So pretty solid execute skill if they're below 50%. Then there's the S2, which is the reason why he's a little bit unique, right? So first, after an except for the caster attacks, if the enemy is below 30%, you increase the combat readiness by 50%, actually. It's way more than 40. So you increase the CR push by 50%. That is a massive jump in the CR bar, right? So you're able to essentially, if you open with him, which is one of the build paths you can go, you get a 50% CR push and you can finish off a unit with an execute ability. Or on the other hand, if you're using him like a CDOM as a damage dealer, right? That's why I say like a CDOM. Let's say you start with an Assassin Sid, you get a unit to below 30%, you get a massive push with Charles, with perception, meaning you're doing extra damage, and you come in with a pretty good, strong S3, and he is a thief, which means he does have access to basket, so you could potentially get a basket and do a ton of damage, right? He does have access to other thief artifacts that can increase damage. So again, you could do pretty good damage if you use him similar to a Challenger Dominio, right? That's why I think he has a lot of potential for cleavers and for aggro players. But then there's the S3, which is why, again, I make the comparison between someone like CDOM and him, and why he can be either an opener or a big damage dealer. So the S3 is going to do an AoE attack that increases attack of all allies and gives you a nice little 20% CR push. Again, y'all starting to see the CDOM references, right? Because you get the attack buff to the allies where CDOM gives crit rate buff, and you still get that 20% CR push, and you do get the evasion, which is the reason people are like, oh, maybe he can be a bruiser. It's not unlikely. The kit doesn't really scream bruiser. He doesn't have that much survivability and that much support outside of that initial S3. So again, you could potentially use him like a general Purgus, but at that point you're playing aggro still, right? And you're playing him as a setup unit. So again, aggro and cleave is where you're going to be using him. But again, for the S3, really nice setup option, and it does decent damage, and you can soul burn it to do extra damage. If you play around with the damage calculator, it actually does really solid damage, almost as much as an RBS3 actually, if I looked at it correctly. So pretty nice, right? It's a pretty good damaging skill. So it does give you two build paths, very similar again to Operator Sigurd. You can either use him as a CDOM, where you have a unit set up for him, right? Where you almost kill an enemy, you set him up, and then you set up the rest of your cleave. Or you can use him as the setup unit, where you do a lot less damage with S3, but you do decent poke. You have the evasion to potentially get a follow-up turn. And you also get that CR push that could potentially give you that extra turn and execute an enemy, right? So you're giving that CR push, you're giving that attack buff, setting up your cleave, and then potentially cutting in with that extra 50% CR and executing a unit after your cleave goes. So again, pretty nice. The only thing I will say, if you're using him as a setup unit, Operator Sigurd is probably better for that job, just because Operator Sigurd is able to strip and set up attack buff as well as having the S2 that can counter more things. Whereas for him, I really do think that the CDOM option is the more unique aspect to him, where he does big damage with the big damage with the S3 after someone potentially sets up and you have a basket or something to get that gab and then potentially kill the enemy team with your cleave, right? So that I could see it more of being the thing. And by the way, this animation is really tragic. It's not one of the cleanest animations in the game. The quotes are sick though. I will say the quotes are sick. I'm not playing with music on right now or with sounds on, but the quotes are pretty sick, right? So I will give him that as far as the quotes. So all in all, again, how does he look like to me? He looks like a CDOM type unit, with the fact that he can set up your team with attack buff and he can cut in right after one of your units sets up for him, right? Or he also can be like an Operator Sigurd type unit where he sets up for your team first and then your cleave goes and then he comes in and executes, right? So he opens up some really cool strategies because we don't have that many units that can do what he does like CDOM kind of does, right? Where they cut in after another unit sets up for you. So that playstyle is something that hasn't been explored yet because there's nothing really similar to it. So that's why I mentioned that if you're a cleaver or bruiser, or not cleaver, cleaver or aggro player, Closer Charles has the chance to not be that huge right now, but in the future, as other units get released, he can potentially become better with time as units are able to support his mechanic and able to do more with it. Again, very similar to Operator Sigurd, where Operator Sigurd didn't start off as good, but her ceiling just kept climbing and up and up and up as more barrier units got introduced, as just like her meta advanced, as more support got figured out, right? So all in all, if you're a cleave player, you may want to pick him up just out of the fact that there is a very good chance in the future he will be good or decent, and for sure he's a decent unit. But again, if you think your cleave is already great, if you think you don't need any more support units, you have OP Sig, you have Polides, you have CDOM, you have all the cleave pieces, he's not as needed. He'd just be another fun toy for you to have. But again, it's a little bit more speculative, which is why I don't recommend pitting for him, because he's more speculative and because there are other units that kind of can do what he does, except of course the single target cleave setups. But again, it's all speculative, which is a little bit more, you're putting resources into something that you don't know if it's going to be really good or if it's going to be just okay, right? But at the worst, he's okay. He definitely functions as a unit, right? And that's what matters. But again, it's ML 5-star. So again, if you're not an aggro cleave player, just skip him. I'm skipping him. I don't play cleave or aggro. There is no slot for him in any of my teams. There is no reason for me to use him. I'm not going to be using him. It's just simple as that, right? But if you are someone that plays cleave, if you are someone that plays aggro, if you play a lot with single target DPS bursters like a Sid, a Kali, and you want a unit that you could potentially cleave and cut with and set up the rest of your team, very similar to a CDOM, then he's a pretty decent pickup for you. But that is going to be all I have for you guys today. Again, if you're right at pity, that's a big choice, but then you will be able to pull for her. But just know that this unit has the potential to, like this other unit that's coming out next week, that's a 4-star. No pity guaranteed for this one, but she has the potential to be a game-changing unit, and you really want to try to pull for her. So keep that in mind, right, when you're playing for Closer Charles. But that is going to be all I have for you guys today. I hope y'all enjoyed the video, and good luck to your summons if you are going for him. But that's all, and I'll see you next time. Peace.